There's something hauntingly beautiful about a kingdom that refuses to die, not in stone or ruins, but in stories. Picture a civilization so powerful, so enigmatic, that when it vanishes from maps, it lingers in whispers, morphing into legend. These are the disappearing kingdoms, realms that slipped through the fingers of history and chose myth as their afterlife. From the mist-shrouded peaks of Shangri-La to the sunken spires of Atlantis, these places taunt us with their elusiveness. They exist somewhere between memory and imagination, their truths tangled with tales. But why? What makes a kingdom abandon its place in the history books and take refuge in folklore? The answer lies in the strange alchemy of human storytelling, where facts soften into fables, and what's lost is often preserved in the most unexpected ways. Think of the last time you heard a story so vivid it felt real, a tale passed down through generations, polished by time until it gleamed like a jewel. Now imagine an entire civilization undergoing that transformation. These kingdoms didn't just fade, they rewrote themselves into the fabric of culture, becoming symbols of paradise, warnings of hubris, or promises of hidden wisdom. Take Lyonesse, the lush land said to have sunk beneath the waves off the coast of Cornwall. Once a thriving realm, it's now a ghost in the waves, remembered only in Arthurian legends and fishermen's laments. Or consider El Dorado, the golden city that lured conquerors into jungles and oblivion. These places teach us something profound. When a kingdom disappears physically, it often grows larger in the human psyche, becoming a mirror for our desires, fears, and dreams. What's truly fascinating isn't just that these kingdoms vanished, it's how they refuse to stay gone. They cling to life in ballads, maps marked with "Here be dragons," and the stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, they're still out there waiting to be found. This video is a journey into the shadowlands between history and myth, where the lines blur and the impossible feels tantalizingly close. We'll explore how kingdoms become legends, why some are remembered while others are forgotten, and what these stories reveal about us. Because every myth holds a kernel of truth, and every lost kingdom is a puzzle begging to be solved. So let's step into the unknown together and uncover the secrets of the realms that chose to live on as stories. Myths are more than just fireside tales, they're the lifeboats of lost civilizations. When a kingdom crumbles, its stories don't fade, they evolve, adapting to new tongues and generations like a whisper passed through time. Consider how the legend of El Dorado began as a ritual of the Muisca people, where a chief covered in gold dust would dive into Lake Guatavita. Over centuries, that single image spiraled into a fantastical city of untold riches, luring explorers to their doom. Why? Because the human mind doesn't just remember, it rebuilds. When facts crumble, imagination lays new bricks. Oral traditions are the first guardians of these vanished worlds. Before ink touched parchment, bards and elders wove histories into song, ensuring that places like Lyonesse, a land swallowed by the sea, lived on in the cadence of a ballad or the sigh of a folktale. These stories aren't mere entertainment, they're maps of identity. The Welsh tales of Cantre Gualod, a lush kingdom lost to rising waters, didn't just mourn a drowned land, they warned of nature's power and the peril of human arrogance. Myths become the moral compasses of cultures, long after the cities they describe turn to dust. Art and religion amplify this alchemy. Temples in Cambodia echo the grandeur of Angkor Wat, a city so vast it was mistaken for a natural wonder by early European explorers. Yet when it faded into the jungle, its legacy didn't vanish, it transformed. Carvings of its splendor traveled on trade routes, morphing into rumors of a hidden metropolis, a paradise on earth. Even the Bible's lost city of Sodom, consumed by divine fire, serves as both caution and curiosity, with archaeologists still debating its real-world echoes. These stories persist because they're not about places, they're about us. What makes one kingdom fade while another becomes legend? It's the weight of its symbolism. Atlantis isn't remembered for its plumbing, but for Plato's lesson about pride. Shangri-La endures not as a real Himalayan valley, but as an emblem of eternal peace. These realms outlive their ruins because they speak to something deeper than history. They live in the space between what we know and what we dare to dream. So the next time you hear a myth about a golden city or a sunken kingdom, listen closely. You're not just hearing a story, you're hearing the echo of a world that refused to be forgotten. Catastrophe has a peculiar way of sharpening memory, not with precision but with grandeur. When a kingdom vanishes overnight, swallowed by the sea or shattered by war, it doesn't simply disappear. It becomes larger than life, its fate rewritten as epic rather than tragic. Take the legend of Atlantis, first mentioned by Plato. Was it a real place? Perhaps, but what turned it into an enduring myth wasn't its advanced civilization. It was the drama of its downfall, a paradise punished by the gods for its arrogance and sunk beneath the waves. That single image, a thriving realm vanishing in a day, resonates because it's more than history. It's a warning carved into collective memory. Natural disasters are the ultimate myth makers. A flood doesn't just drown a city, it births a story. The ancient Sumerian tale of Gilgamesh includes a deluge so eerily similar to the biblical Noah's Ark that scholars believe both stem from real catastrophic floods in Mesopotamia. These weren't just weather events, they were cosmic rebukes, divine resets. When the Minoan civilization on Crete collapsed after the volcanic eruption of Thera around 1600 BC, the chaos left behind didn't fade into obscurity. Instead, it likely inspired the Greek myth of the Minotaur's labyrinth, a twisting, inescapable ruin, mirroring the shattered palaces archaeologists would uncover millennia later. Ruins become riddles, and riddles demand stories. War, too, has a way of turning history into legend. The fall of Troy wasn't just a military defeat, it became a saga of love, betrayal, and a wooden horse that echoed across Homer's epics. The real Troy was likely one of many Bronze Age cities sacked by invaders, but its story was polished into a parable about hubris and fate. Even plagues follow this pattern. The devastation of the Justinian plague in the 6th century didn't just depopulate cities, it fueled tales of divine wrath, with survivors describing visions of angels striking down sinners. When reality is unbearable, myth offers meaning, dressing chaos in the garb of moral lessons. What's striking is how these stories follow a recipe. Take one part disaster, mix with human imagination, and let time amplify the details. The city of Wise in Breton folklore didn't just flood. It was drowned because its princess, Dahat, stole the key to the sea gates in a fit of recklessness. The ruins of the Khmer Empire's anchor weren't merely abandoned, they were discovered by European explorers centuries later, who spun tales of a jungle-shrouded utopia, ignoring the slow decline that actually took place. Catastrophe simplifies complexity, turning gradual collapse into singular, dramatic moments we can't look away from. These myths endure because they do more than explain the past. They prepare us for the future. When we hear of Atlantis, we're not just hearing about a lost city, we're rehearsing our own vulnerability. The same tectonic forces that sank Helike, the real-life Greek city swallowed by an earthquake in 373 BC, still rumble beneath our feet today. By mythologizing disaster, we turn fear into something we can hold, examine, even master. After all, a story about a drowned kingdom isn't just a tragedy. It's a survival guide written in the ink of imagination. And that's why these tales never truly fade. They're not about what was lost, they're about what we refuse to forget. Imagine holding water in your hands. The tighter you grip, the faster it slips through your fingers. That's how history behaves in the realm of oral tradition. Before ink and parchment, before libraries and archives, the past lived in the voices of storytellers. Kingdoms like Hyperborea, a land of eternal sunshine beyond the north wind, or Avalon, the misty island where Excalibur was forged, didn't vanish because they were destroyed. They disappeared because human memory is a sieve, and time reshapes truth like waves smoothing stones. Bards and elders weren't just entertainers, they were living libraries. In the flickering light of hearth fires, they spun tales of golden ages and fallen cities, their words bending with each generation. A detail added here, a flourish there, until the line between fact and fable blurred beyond recognition. Take Hyperborea, a paradise described by ancient Greeks as a place where sickness and old age didn't exist. Was it a real Arctic civilization, or just a longing for a world untouched by suffering? Without written records, we'll never know for certain, and that's the point. Oral history isn't about preserving facts, it's about preserving meaning. The fragility of spoken word is also its power. When a story passes through dozens of voices over centuries, it adapts like a tree bending toward sunlight. Avalon began as a Celtic legend, a mystical isle of apple trees and healers. By the time medieval poets wove it into Arthurian lore, it had become a sanctuary for wounded kings and enchanted swords. The real Avalon, if it ever existed, is irrelevant. What matters is how the idea of it comforted people. A place where heroes didn't die but waited just out of reach. That's the alchemy of oral tradition. It turns geography into metaphor. Shamans and griots, the storytellers of West Africa, understood this intimately. Their tales weren't frozen in time, they breathed. The Mali Empire's oral histories, passed down by griots for over 800 years, aren't perfect records of battles and kings. They're living narratives, adjusted to teach new lessons to new generations. When a griot sings of Sundiata Keita, the Lion King who founded Mali, the details might shift, but the essence remains: resilience, unity, the triumph of wit over brute strength. These stories weren't meant to be textbooks, they were compasses, yet this fluidity comes at a cost. For every Avalon preserved in song, countless real places faded into silence. The Tartessos of southern Spain, a wealthy trading kingdom mentioned by Herodotus, left behind no chronicles, just a handful of artifacts and the haunting sense of a puzzle missing half its pieces. Or take the Kingdom of Yam, a desert power trading with ancient Egypt. Archaeologists debate its location, but its name survives only in tomb inscriptions and half-remembered caravan tales. Without a scribe's steady hand, history becomes a game of telephone across millennia. What's miraculous is how some threads endure against all odds. The Aboriginal songlines of Australia map the land through melody, encoding thousands of years of navigation and sacred sites in verses so precise they can guide travelers across deserts. These aren't just stories, they're living maps, proof that oral tradition can outlast stone monuments. But even songlines evolve. A flood might become a battle between spirits, a drought, a lesson in patience. The facts soften, but the wisdom remains. That's the paradox of vanished kingdoms remembered through speech. They're like footprints in sand. The harder we try to preserve their original shape, the more we distort them. Yet in that distortion lies their immortality. Hyperborea isn't a lost continent, it's humanity's dream of a world without pain. Avalon isn't an island, it's the hope that greatness never truly dies. Oral tradition doesn't fail history, it transcends it, turning kingdoms into ideas too powerful to fade. Archaeology doesn't just dig up dirt, it sifts through dreams. When a shovel strikes the earth, it might uncover pottery shards or the faint outline of a wall, but it's also probing the shadowy border between fact and fable. Take Troy, the city once thought to be pure legend until a German businessman named Heinrich Schliemann followed Homer's verses like a treasure map. In 1870, his team uncovered charred stones and golden artifacts in Turkey, and suddenly, the Iliad's epic battles weren't just poetry, they were echoes of a real Bronze Age conflict. Yet even here, myth tangled with reality. Schliemann, desperate to prove his theory, mishandled layers of the site, blurring timelines in his zeal to find Priam's kingdom. The lesson: archaeology can confirm legends, but it's just as vulnerable to the stories we want to believe. For every Troy, there's a Prester John, a phantom king who eluded explorers for centuries. Medieval Europe buzzed with tales of this Christian monarch ruling a paradise in the east, his kingdom overflowing with marvels, fountains of youth, mountains of gems, even the gates of Eden. Maps marked his realm vaguely beyond Persia or Ethiopia, and popes sent envoys to find him. But with no physical trace, the legend shifted like mirage, always just beyond reach. Was Prester John pure fiction, or a distorted memory of real rulers like Ethiopia's Negus or Genghis Khan's Nestorian allies? The search itself reveals how myths can hijack history, turning hopeful speculation into expeditions that reshape geography and sometimes stumble onto real discoveries. Then there are the cases where myth and archaeology dance in perfect step. The Minoan civilization of Crete was little more than a name in Greek lore until Sir Arthur Evans uncovered the labyrinthine palace of Knossos in 1900. Suddenly, the Minotaur's mythical maze had a blueprint, a sprawling complex of frescoed corridors and ritual chambers, but Evans, like Schliemann, couldn't resist embellishing. He reconstructed parts of the palace with bold and often inaccurate restorations, blurring the line between ancient art and modern imagination. The result: a real kingdom that still feels half-dreamed, its truth forever alloyed with legend. Sometimes the earth itself seems to conspire with storytellers. In the 1960s, archaeologists working in northern Iraq found a fire-scarred layer in the city of Nineveh that matched the Bible's account of God's wrath upon Jonah. But was this divine judgment or just one of many Assyrian cities sacked in war? Physical evidence rarely delivers neat answers. The ruins of Tiahuanaco in Bolivia, once touted as the cradle of a lost super-civilization, turned out to be a sophisticated but mortal empire. Yet its monolithic gate of the sun still fuels theories of ancient astronauts and forgotten wisdom. Artifacts whisper, but they seldom shout the whole truth. The most tantalizing cases are those suspended between proof and parable. The kingdom of Sheba, famed for its queen's visit to Solomon, left inscriptions in Yemen and Ethiopia, but no definitive palace. The Tartessian culture of Spain, rich in silver and mentioned by Herodotus, vanished so completely that its artifacts could fill a single room. These gaps aren't failures, they're invitations. Every undeciphered script, every unlocated city keeps the past alive as a puzzle, resisting the finality of a museum label. That's the heart of archaeology's romance with myth. It's not just about proving legends true or false, it's about understanding why we cling to them. When explorers hacked through the Cambodian jungle to rediscover Angkor Wat in the 1860s, they weren't just finding ruins, they were resurrecting a symbol of human grandeur. The stones confirmed the Khmer Empire's power, but it was the myth of a jungle-shrouded paradise that captured the world's imagination. In the end, perhaps these kingdoms serve a higher purpose than mere existence. They remind us that history isn't just what happened, it's what we refuse to let die. High in the thin air of the Himalayas, where snow meets sky, there's said to be a kingdom untouched by time, a place where war and suffering cannot enter. Shambhala isn't just a myth, it's a promise. According to ancient Buddhist texts, this hidden realm exists somewhere beyond the ice peaks, a circular valley where enlightened rulers guide humanity from the shadows. But here's the twist: Shambhala isn't lost, it's waiting. The Kalachakra Tantra, a sacred text dating back over 1,000 years, describes it not as a forgotten ruin but as a sanctuary that will reveal itself when the world teeters on the brink of collapse. This isn't just a fairy tale. It's a spiritual contingency plan woven into the fabric of Tibetan Buddhism with startling precision. What makes Shambhala so compelling isn't just its mystery, it's its duality. On one hand, it's described with geographic detail: 8 snow-capped mountains like lotus petals, a capital of gold and sapphire, rivers flowing with sacred nectar. Early Tibetan monks even drew maps, placing it tentatively north of the Siachen Glacier. Yet these coordinates always dissolve upon closer inspection, like mist in morning sun. Because Shambhala isn't truly a place, it's a mirror. When explorers like Nicholas Roerich trekked through the Himalayas in the 1920s, seeking its gates, they missed the deeper truth. The kingdom's physical absence is the point. It exists precisely because it can't be found a refuge for hope when all other lights go out. The genius of Shambhala lies in its adaptability. To medieval Tibetan scholars, it was a literal kingdom preparing for a final battle against darkness. To modern Buddhists, it's often interpreted as an allegory for inner peace, a metaphor for the enlightened mind. Yet, even as interpretations shift, the core remains unchanged. The idea that somewhere, somehow, there's a sanctuary preserving wisdom for humanity's darkest hour. This elastic quality lets Shambhala defy time. Unlike Atlantis or El Dorado, which are relics of a vanished past, Shambhala is perpetually imminent, a story that renews itself with each generation's anxieties. Western fascination twisted the myth in unexpected ways. Theosophists in the 19th century blended it with hollow earth theories, claiming Agartha, a subterranean version of Shambhala, thrived beneath our feet. Nazis tragically warped it further, sending expeditions to Tibet in search of Aryan roots. These corruptions reveal a painful truth: myths are fragile in the hands of those who crave literal answers. The real Shambhala resists such reduction. It's not a spot on a map but a state of balance, a reminder that the best shelters aren't made of stone but of stories. Perhaps that's why the legend endures. In a world of climate crises and pandemics, the idea of a hidden citadel preserving ancient knowledge feels less like fantasy and more like a psychological lifeline. Tibetan lamas teach that Shambhala's location isn't secret, it's simply invisible to those not ready to see. The kingdom didn't vanish from history. It lives in the space between despair and resilience, waiting not in the mountains, but in the human capacity to imagine light beyond the darkness. And that makes it more real than any ruin could ever be. Atlantis didn't sink into the ocean, it sank into our collective imagination, and that's why it never truly disappeared. Plato first conjured this doomed civilization in his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, around 360 BC, framing it not as history but as a moral fable. A utopian island nation, blessed with divine favor and advanced technology, grows arrogant. The gods punish its corruption by sending earthquakes and floods, swallowing it beneath the waves in a single day. But here's the twist: Plato never meant for Atlantis to be real. He planted it as a philosophical thought experiment, a warning about the fragility of power. Yet within centuries, his allegory escaped the page, morphing into a legend so potent that explorers would spend millennia hunting for its ghost. The genius of Atlantis lies in its ambiguity. Plato's scant details a circular city of concentric rings, a location beyond the pillars of Hercules, were just enough to tantalize but never enough to pin down. Like a Rorschach blot, every era projected its anxieties onto the myth. Medieval monks mapped Atlantis as a lost Christian paradise. Renaissance scholars, intoxicated by rediscovered classical texts, treated Plato's tale as a lost chapter of history. When the Americas were discovered, some theorists claimed the Aztec and Inca empires were Atlantean colonies. The myth didn't just endure, it evolved, absorbing each generation's obsessions. Modernity turned Atlantis into a mirror for scientific and spiritual revolutions. The late 19th century, drunk on progress and invention, reimagined it as a high-tech civilization with flying machines and energy crystals, an ancient echo of the industrial age. Psychologists like Carl Jung saw it as a symbol of the collective unconscious, a drowned realm representing humanity's repressed fears. Even Nazis twisted the myth, funding expeditions to prove Atlantis was the Aryan homeland. The darker the era, the brighter Atlantis shone as either a cautionary tale or a lost ideal. Archaeology, rather than debunking the legend, fueled it. When the Minoan civilization was unearthed on Crete, its volcanic collapse around 1600 BC seemed to mirror Plato's cataclysm. The Azores Plateau, the Dogger Bank in the North Sea, even Antarctica, each has been identified as Atlantis by overeager theorists. The most compelling candidate, the Richat structure in Mauritania, matches Plato's circular city so eerily that satellite images go viral every few years. But no artifact bears Atlantean script, no ruins declare themselves, and that's the point. Atlantis thrives not in spite of the lack of evidence, but because of it. Absence invites obsession. What makes Atlantis the ultimate lost kingdom isn't its grandeur or tragedy, it's its adaptability. Climate change fears cast it as a parable of rising seas. Transhumanists hail it as a precursor race. Conspiracy theorists whisper of government cover-ups. The myth outlasts because it refuses to settle, shape-shifting to address each generation's existential dread. Plato's greatest trick wasn't inventing Atlantis. It was leaving just enough room for us to keep reinventing it, ensuring that a civilization he conjured as fiction would never, ever die. The jungle doesn't surrender its secrets easily, it swallows them whole. Yet for centuries, men hacked through vines and waded into swamps, driven by the promise of a city where gold was as common as dust. El Dorado wasn't born a myth. It began as a fleeting moment, a Muisca chief in what's now Colombia, covered head to toe in gold powder, standing on a raft at the center of Lake Guatavita. As dawn broke, he'd plunge into the water, washing away the gleaming layer while his people tossed treasures into the depths, a sacred offering to the gods. This ritual, witnessed by a handful of Spanish conquistadors in the 1500s, spiraled into something far grander in the retelling. By the time the story reached Europe, the man had become a city, the city became a kingdom, and the kingdom became an obsession. Gold has a way of distorting reality. The Muisca's ceremony was about balance, a sacred exchange with nature. But to the conquistadors, it was a beacon, proof that unimaginable wealth lay just beyond the next mountain range. Gonzalo Pizarro, brother of the infamous Francisco, led an expedition through the Andes in 1541, abandoning hundreds to starvation and exposure in search of El Dorado's glimmering streets. Sir Walter Raleigh, the English adventurer, mounted 2 disastrous voyages to Guyana, convinced the Golden City lurked in the jungle's heart. Each failure only thickened the legend, because if El Dorado hadn't been found, surely it must be even grander than imagined. The cruel irony, the Muisca themselves were never rich in the way Europeans craved. Their gold was spiritual currency, not hoarded wealth. Their golden man wasn't a king but a temporary figure in a cosmic ritual. Yet colonial greed transformed this nuance into a fever dream, a blank canvas for desperation and delusion. Maps of the era marked El Dorado with tantalizing vagueness, shifting its location from Venezuela to the Amazon basin as each expedition returned empty-handed. The myth metastasized because it served too many purposes to justify exploitation, to fuel national rivalries, to soothe the sting of failure with the promise that next time, the gold would be real. What's haunting isn't the persistence of the myth, but its metamorphosis. By the 1800s, El Dorado had shed its Aztec and Inca trappings, reborn in Western pop culture as a metaphor for any unreachable prize. Mark Twain wrote of it as the fool's errand of capitalism. Voltaire mocked it in Candide as the ultimate hollow fantasy. Yet even stripped of its golden veneer, the legend endured because it spoke to something deeper, the human tendency to chase illusions rather than face the truth. The real El Dorado was never a place. It was the moment before the dive, the breath between desire and disappointment, where anything still seems possible. Modern archaeologists have found traces of the Muisca's gold offerings in Lake Guatavita, tiny figurines resting in the silt, but the conquistadors' El Dorado. It exists where it always has, in the space between what we see and what we wish to see. That's the power of a disappearing kingdom that was never there to begin with. It doesn't just vanish, it lingers not in ruins but in the stories we tell ourselves about what's just out of reach. Avalon begins as a whisper in the mist, an island veiled in twilight, where the boundaries between this world and the next grow thin. In the earliest Celtic legends, it wasn't a kingdom at all but a liminal space, a place of apple orchards and healing springs where time moved differently. The name itself, Avalon, likely stems from the Welsh word afal, meaning apple, a fruit long associated with immortality in Celtic myth. But how did this quiet, sacred isle transform into the legendary resting place of King Arthur, a sword-clad king waiting to return in Britain's hour of need? The answer lies in the alchemy of cultural memory, where geography dissolves into symbolism and history bends to the weight of collective longing. Glastonbury Tor, that solitary hill rising from England's Somerset levels, may hold the key. In the 12th century, monks at Glastonbury Abbey made a stunning claim. They'd unearthed the graves of Arthur and Guinevere beneath their chapel. Suddenly, the local landscape, already steeped in pre-Christian spirituality, became grafted onto Arthurian legend. The Tor's eerie silhouette, often shrouded in marshland fog, mirrored descriptions of Avalon as an island, half in shadow, half in light. Whether by coincidence or design, Glastonbury's watery surroundings, once navigable by boat before the marshes drained, fit the lore of an island accessible only to those summoned. The monks' discovery wasn't just piety, it was PR, a way to attract pilgrims and patronage. Yet in blending place and myth, they gave Avalon something it never had before, an address. Medieval poets took this seed and let it flower. Geoffrey of Monmouth, writing in the 12th century, painted Avalon as a surgeon's table where Arthur's mortal wounds were tended by the enchantress Morgan Le Fay. By the time Thomas Malory penned Le Morte d'Arthur in the 15th century, the island had become a celestial waiting room, a realm outside time where Arthur's death or lack thereof could remain deliciously ambiguous. This evolution reveals a fascinating pattern. Avalon didn't fade from memory as a forgotten place. It ascended as an idea, transforming from a possible geographic location into a metaphor for the soul's journey. The island's defining feature was no longer its coastline but its purpose, a sanctuary for what cannot die. be it a king's body or a culture's ideals. The genius of Avalon lies in its refusal to be pinned down. In Welsh lore, it's Annwn, the otherworld where heroes feast eternally. In Creation de Troyes romances, it's a feminine space of magic and intuition, counterbalancing Camelot's chivalric rigidity. Even today, modern druids gather at Glastonbury at sunrise, watching light spill over the Tor as if expecting Excalibur's gleam. Avalon endures not because it was real, but because it answers a need deeper than fact. The hope that what we love isn't truly lost, only hidden, waiting just beyond sight. That's the power of a kingdom turned myth. It doesn't vanish, it transcends, becoming not a place we can map, but a story we can't forget. For centuries, the Amazon was portrayed as a green hell, a vast, impenetrable wilderness where only small tribes eked out survival. European explorers wrote off any tales of grand settlements as fever dreams, the fantasies of heathens or conquistadors gone mad. But the jungle kept its secrets, hiding clues in plain sight. Patches of unnaturally fertile soil called terra preta, strange geometric mounds visible only from above, and oral histories speaking of cities that shone. Now, modern archaeology is unraveling the truth that the Amazon wasn't a virgin forest but a graveyard of civilizations, their stories dismissed as myth by those who couldn't see past their own biases. Take Cuhacugu, a sprawling network of settlements near Brazil's Xingu River. Satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar have revealed a metropolis of causeways, plazas, and even fish farms, a complex society that thrived between 1,000 and 500 years ago. Local legends spoke of a great house of the ancestors, a place where the sun once bounced off towering wooden palisades. For generations, these stories were dismissed as folktales. Then archaeologists found the posts, the same carbonized wood described in oral histories, arranged in perfect circles where longhouses once stood. Cuhacugu wasn't imagined, it was remembered, its truth preserved in stories even as the jungle consumed its physical remains. The key to this mystery lies in terra preta, the black earth that dots the Amazon basin. Unlike the region's naturally nutrient-poor soil, these dark patches are human-made, engineered by ancient civilizations using charcoal, pottery shards, and compost. European colonizers assumed such fertile ground was a fluke of nature, but terra preta isn't accidental. It's the fingerprint of large-scale agriculture, proof that societies here were far more advanced than outsiders believed. Modern scientists have analyzed these soils to stunning results. Some tracts remain fertile after 800 years, outlasting the empires that created them. The Kayapo people call it Iko-Eat, a true soil, a fitting name for evidence that upends centuries of assumptions. What's most haunting isn't just the scale of these lost cities, but how thoroughly they were erased. Spanish friar Gaspar de Carvajal wrote in 1542 of a jungle trek where his party glimpsed cities that gleamed white, and roads lined with orchards, accounts later dismissed as exaggeration. Yet LiDAR scans in Bolivia's Llanos de Mojos have uncovered exactly that, raised causeways connecting ceremonial centers, surrounded by artificial ponds and fields. These weren't primitive villages but engineered landscapes designed to flourish in harmony with the rainforest. The myth of the empty Amazon says more about European arrogance than reality. Indigenous stories weren't legends, they were maps patiently waiting for science to catch up. This revelation rewrites more than history, it reshapes our understanding of myth itself. When the people of the Xingu speak of Cuhacugu's downfall, they describe a great fire from the sky, likely a metaphor for disease brought by European contact. In the Andes, similar tales told of golden men who turned to shadows after the conquistadors came. These weren't mere stories, they were survival strategies, ways to encode trauma and resilience when writing wasn't an option. The Amazon's lost cities never vanished. They went underground, hiding in plain sight as folklore until the world was ready to listen. The real myth wasn't the existence of these kingdoms, it was the idea that they ever disappeared at all. Off the jagged coast of Cornwall, where the Atlantic gnaws at the cliffs, fishermen still speak of hearing bells beneath the waves. These aren't the chimes of shipwrecks, they say, but the echoes of Lyonesse, a kingdom swallowed by the sea. According to legend, this was a land of lush fields and towering cities, home to Tristan of Arthurian fame, until a single catastrophic storm sent it tumbling into the depths. But here's the twist: Lyonesse might not be pure fantasy. Geological surveys reveal that the Isles of Scilly, now just a scattering of rocky outcrops, were once a single landmass connected to mainland Britain. Around 5,000 years ago, rising seas drowned this bridge, leaving behind fragmented islands and a mystery ripe for myth-making. The transformation from drowned land to legendary kingdom is a masterclass in cultural alchemy. Medieval chroniclers, drawing on Celtic flood myths and half-remembered history, spun Lyonesse into a tragic paradise. In these tales, the kingdom's downfall wasn't just geological, it was moral. Some versions blame a prideful king who ignored a saint's warning. Others describe a vengeful wave summoned by broken oaths. The recurring motif of underwater bells, mentioned as early as the 12th century, is particularly haunting. It's as if the land itself refuses to be silenced, its churches tolling a ghostly lament from the seabed. This wasn't merely poetic license. Bells were sacred in medieval Europe. Their sound marked time, called communities to prayer, and warded off evil. By giving Lyonesse a submerged carillon, storytellers preserved its spiritual heartbeat long after its soil vanished. Arthurian romances cemented Lyonesse's mythical status. Tristan, the star-crossed knight, became its most famous son, linking the kingdom to Camelot's glittering orbit. But while Arthur's court symbolized chivalric ideals, Lyonesse represented something murkier: the fragility of human endeavors against nature's whims. The difference between Lyonesse and Atlantis is telling. Plato's lost city fell due to divine punishment, but Lyonesse's fate feels eerily plausible. Coastal erosion and storm surges were, and still are, very real threats to Cornish communities. The legend didn't just entertain, it encoded collective trauma, turning climate change into a cautionary epic. Modern archaeology adds tantalizing layers. Divers near the Isles of Scilly have found submerged stone walls and field boundaries, evidence of ancient habitation, now 15 feet underwater. These ruins likely belonged to ordinary farming settlements, not a grand kingdom. But folklore isn't interested in mundane truth, it elevates, transforms. The same process that turned a drowned landscape into Lyonesse also birthed parallels like Wise in Brittany or Cantre, Gualod in Wales. Each story, though rooted in real coastal submergence, becomes a vessel for deeper themes: the arrogance of rulers, the impermanence of glory, the persistence of memory. Perhaps that's why Lyonesse endures. It's not just a sunken city, it's a metaphor for how all civilizations eventually meet the sea. The bells that ring in fishermen's tales aren't literal bronze, but the echoes of places we've loved and lost. Every culture has its Lyonesse, a homeland swallowed by war, disaster, or time, yet forever chiming in the stories we pass down. The kingdom's greatest trick wasn't surviving the waves. It was teaching us that drowning isn't the same as disappearing. In the year 1165, a letter arrived in Europe that would set kingdoms ablaze with longing. Addressed to the Byzantine emperor and the Pope, It claimed to be from Prester John, a Christian monarch ruling a paradise beyond the Islamic world. His kingdom, he wrote, overflowed with marvels, fountains of youth, rivers of gemstones, even a mirror reflecting every corner of his domain. But the true allure wasn't wealth, it was salvation. At a time when Crusader states were crumbling and Christendom felt besieged, Prester John promised an army of 10,000 knights ready to flank Islam from the rear. The letter was a masterpiece of medieval fantasy, likely forged by a European cleric, yet it ignited something far more potent than fiction, a need so desperate it turned rumor into revelation. What followed was a 500-year game of geopolitical hide and seek. When Mongol horsemen thundered into Eastern Europe in the 13th century, friars like Giovanni da Pian del Carpine mistook them for Prester John's vanguard, interpreting their tolerance of Nestorian Christians as a sign of holy kinship. Later, as Portuguese ships rounded Africa, explorers probed every river mouth for traces of his realm. The Ethiopian highlands, with its ancient Coptic churches and isolation from Muslim conquests, seemed the perfect candidate until envoys realized its emperors bore little resemblance to the mythic priest-king. The more reality disappointed, the further the legend drifted, morphing to fit each new frontier. The genius of Prester John's myth lay in its elasticity. For Crusaders, he was a military savior. For Renaissance scholars, a philosopher king ruling Plato's republic in the flesh. When Vasco da Gama reached India, local tales of St. Thomas Christians sparked fresh hope that Prester John's descendants ruled nearby. Even after the Enlightenment, the idea persisted. 18th century maps sometimes marked his kingdom in terra incognita, a blank space filled with collective yearning. Archaeology now suggests whispers behind the legend. The real-life inspiration might have been the Nestorian Christian rulers of the Karaites in Central Asia, or Ethiopia's Zagwe dynasty with its rock-hewn churches at Lalibela. But these fragments of truth only deepen the mystery. Prester John's kingdom wasn't just misidentified, it was deliberately unfindable because its true purpose wasn't geographic but psychological. A myth that moves is a myth that lives, adapting to console merchants fearing Ottoman blockades or kings dreaming of global Christian alliances. When European explorers finally reached Ethiopia's Solomonic emperors in the 1500s, they found a complex civilization but no crystal palaces or armies of saints. The disappointment should have killed the myth. Instead, it simply shifted shape again, proving that some kingdoms aren't meant to be found. They exist to remind us that hope, like faith, rarely demands evidence, just enough shadow to let imagination breathe. Babylon was a colossus, a city of towering ziggurats, bustling bazaars, and laws etched in stone. Yet ask anyone today, and they'll likely recall just one thing: the Hanging Gardens. Not Hammurabi's code, not the Ishtar Gate's cobalt tiles, but a verdant marvel that might never have existed. How does a single feature, possibly imaginary, eclipse an entire civilization? The answer lies in the peculiar alchemy of memory, where grandeur condenses into fragments too dazzling to question. Greek historians like Strabo and Diodorus Siculus painted the gardens as a mountain of terraced greenery, an engineering marvel with waterfalls and exotic blooms cascading down its tiers. But here's the catch: Babylonian records never mention them. Not a single cuneiform tablet, royal inscription, or merchant's ledger hints at their construction. The garden's first detailed descriptions come from outsiders writing centuries after Babylon's peak outsides, who may have been stitching together travelers' tales, or even conflating Babylon with Nineveh's famed aqueducts. Yet this gap between evidence and legend only fuels the myth's persistence. Absence becomes a canvas, and imagination fills the voids with palms and lotus blossoms. What's revealing isn't just the garden's disputed reality, but what their prominence says about how we remember empires. Babylon's true marvels, its legal systems, astronomical charts, and urban planning don't sparkle in the popular imagination like a floating oasis. Complexity fades, spectacle endures, the hanging gardens tap into something primal, the human love for paradox, a garden in the desert, life suspended in midair. The very impossibility of the image makes it unforgettable, reducing a millennia-spanning civilization to a single postcard-perfect mirage. Consider how other kingdoms suffer this same reduction. Egypt is often distilled to pyramids, ignoring its medical papyri and poetry. The Maya becomes sacrificial altars, their mathematical genius overlooked. Legends simplify not out of malice but necessity. They're mnemonic devices, turning sprawling histories into bite-sized wonders. The Hanging Gardens may have been Babylon's myth, but they're also its most effective ambassador, ensuring that even if the city's name fades, the dream of a skyborn Eden never does. Perhaps that's the garden's true purpose. They remind us that history isn't just written in clay or stone, but in the stories we can't stop retelling. Whether real or mirage, the gardens outlived Babylon's walls because they weren't just a place. They were a question: how far will humans go to carve beauty from barrenness? And that's a story no drought can wither. The forests of Quebec hold more than pine and caribou. They cradle one of history's most tantalizing ghost kingdoms. In 1535, French explorer Jacques Cartier pressed inland from the St. Lawrence River, his ears buzzing with tales from the Iroquois people. They spoke of Segney, a land where men wore woolens instead of hides, where gold and copper flowed like rivers, ruled by a blonde king in a city of silver. For Cartier, shivering in his Breton woolens, this wasn't just a story, it was destiny calling. Here, in the New World's uncharted vastness, might lie a northern Tenochtitlan, ripe for the taking. But Segney wasn't just misheard. It was a mirror reflecting Europe's deepest fantasies back at itself. The roots of the myth reveal a tragic comedy of errors. When Donnacona, a captured Iroquois chief, described the kingdom to Cartier, he likely referenced the actual Segney River region, a trading hub where distant tribes bartered goods like native copper. But lost in translation, these fragments morphed into something grander. The Blonde King may have been a reference to fair-haired Inuit traders seen along Hudson Bay. The woolens could have been finely woven rabbit skin robes. Yet to French ears, these details conjured Norse settlements or even Welsh Prince Madoc's fabled colonies. Wishful thinking did the rest, stitching scraps into a tapestry of gold-threaded delusion. What followed was a century of futile searches, each expedition peeling back another layer of the wilderness without finding so much as a silver spoon. Cartier's men froze near Tadoussac, convinced Segney lay just beyond the next ridge. Samuel de Champlain later mapped the Phantom Kingdom deep into Ontario, his compass swinging between hope and hearsay. The irony, the real wealth of the region, its beaver pelts, was trampled underfoot as explorers chased a mirage. Greed, as much as geography, kept Segney alive on maps until the late 1600s, its borders shrinking with each failed journey but never quite vanishing. The kingdom's staying power lies in its perfect storm of plausibility. Unlike El Dorado's jungle excess or Atlantis's pagan grandeur, Segney fit neatly into European medieval lore, a lost Christian outpost waiting to be reclaimed. Its alleged northern location dodged the Spanish monopoly on southern riches, offering France a colonial shortcut to glory. Most tellingly, the myth adapted. When no cities materialized, Segney became a network of wealthy tribes. When tribes proved nomadic, it transformed into hidden mines, Like a will-o'-the-wisp, it always flickered just ahead, redefining itself to stay forever almost within reach. Modern historians see a darker truth beneath the glitter. The Iroquois may have weaponized the myth, dangling Segney as bait to lure Europeans away from their own territories, an early case of misinformation as survival strategy. Meanwhile, France's obsession drained resources from viable settlements, leaving Quebec chronically underfunded. Segney's real legacy isn't treasure, but the lesson it whispers across centuries, that a kingdom conjured by desire is far harder to dismantle than one built of stone. The forest stood silent, but colonial ears heard only what they wished to hear, and in that space between truth and hunger, a phantom empire took root. Perhaps Segney's greatest trick was becoming more useful as a dream than it ever could have been as reality. Its specter justified expeditions, fueled rivalries, and nourished the lie that America's wealth was there for the taking. Today, the name lingers on maps: a river, a national park, an echo of that first fatal misunderstanding. The kingdom never sank beneath waves or jungle. It simply stepped back into the trees, leaving us to ponder how easily a wish can wear the clothes of a place, and how stubbornly such phantoms refuse to die. The waves off Brittany's coast don't just crash, they whisper a name, carried on salt spray and storm winds: Wise. Legend paints this drowned city as a paradise turned prison, its towers once gleaming above the sea until a single act of recklessness sent it crashing into the depths. But unlike Atlantis, swallowed by divine wrath, Wise's downfall wears a more intimate face: Princess Dahat, the ruler's daughter, whose curiosity undid a kingdom. The story unfolds with operatic tragedy. A city protected by a massive dike, its gates secured each night with a single golden key. Dahat, seduced by a mysterious knight, some say the devil himself, steals the key during a wild feast. The gates burst open, the sea rushes in, and Wise vanishes beneath the waves, all but its king, who escapes on horseback as the waters claw at his heels. What makes Wise unforgettable isn't just its dramatic end, but how tightly its myth clings to real geology. Brittany's coastline is a graveyard of sunken settlements, their outlines still visible at low tide. The Bay of Douarnenez, where Wise supposedly sank, has Roman-era fish tanks, now submerged, proof that rising seas reshaped this land long before the legend took form. But the tale doesn't just explain flooding, it weaponizes it. Medieval Breton preachers wielded Wise as a cautionary fable, its fate a divine rebuke against vice. Dahat's sin varies by telling, sometimes lust, sometimes arrogance, but the message stays sharp. Nature's fury mirrors moral failure. This duality, geological fact fused with moral parable, gives Wise eerie staying power. Fishermen claim to hear its bells on stormy nights, a sonic ghost echoing Dahat's fatal mistake. The city's layout, described as circular with radiating streets, mirrors actual Iron Age settlements found along the French coast. Even the Golden Key resurfaces in folklore, transformed into the Key of Wise, a metaphor for reckless trust. Unlike Atlantis, which drifted into abstract philosophy, Wise remained local and visceral, its lessons tailored to coastal communities facing the sea's caprice. Modern retellings reveal the myth's adaptability. In feminist revisions, Dahat becomes a rebellious heroine punished for autonomy. Environmentalists reframe the flood as climate allegory, where human hubris, not gods, summons the waves. Yet the core tension endures. Wise is both a real place lost to time and a blank slate for our deepest anxieties. Its genius lies in balance. The city is just tangible enough to feel possible, just mystical enough to defy scrutiny. When archaeologists uncovered submerged menhirs near Douarnenez, the discovery didn't debunk the legend, it deepened the mystery. proving that the land remembers what history forgets. The true lesson of Wise isn't about a princess's mistake. It's about why some stories outlast stone. Kingdoms that vanish without moral weight fade into footnotes. But those that drown in metaphor, they never sink completely. Wise lingers because it's more than a sunken city. It's a mirror held up to every generation, reflecting whatever fears or failures we bring to the shore. And like the tide, it always returns. The merchants of ancient Cadiz had a story they loved to tell, one that sent Greek traders leaning closer over their wine cups, their fingers itching for maps. Far up the Guadalquivir River, they whispered, lay a city where the streets ran with silver, where tin and gold piled high as harvest grain. Tartessos, they called it, a kingdom so rich its kings dined on plates of solid bronze. Yet for all the tales, no Greek ever laid eyes on this fabled metropolis. By the time historians like Herodotus wrote it down, Tartessos had already slipped into legend, leaving behind a single haunting question. Was this the greatest trading empire the Iron Age ever knew, or the Mediterranean's first viral marketing scheme? The clues are tantalizing but fractured. Phoenician traders, the ancient world's merchant kings, established colonies along Spain's southern coast around 900 BC, drawn by rumors of rivers thick with alluvial gold. Their pottery and inscriptions mention Tarshish, a wealthy port possibly linked to Tartessos. Then there's the treasure of El Carambolo, 21 golden artifacts unearthed near Seville in 1958, their intricate designs blending Phoenician and local motifs. To archaeologists, these weren't just pretty baubles, they were receipts, proof that someone in this region had wealth and taste enough to commission such luxuries, trading metals for Mediterranean finery. Yet Tartessos resists easy categorization. Unlike the mythical Atlantis, it appears in sober accounts. The Greek geographer Strabo describes its location near the island of Cadiz, where the Guadalquivir meets the sea. Biblical references to Tarshish's ships of tin align with Iberia's real role as Europe's metals broker. Even the name hints at roots. Some scholars link it to Tartessus, a local river god. But here's where commerce clouds the waters. Phoenician merchants had every incentive to exaggerate Tartessos's wealth, luring competitors away from their true sources of Iberian copper and tin. A city that's always just upriver can't be fact-checked. The kingdom's sudden disappearance only thickens the mystery. By the 5th century BCE, references to Tartessos dry up. Some blame Carthaginian blockades choking its trade routes. Others point to sediment buildup that strangled its ports. But folklore offers a more poetic end, a catastrophic flood, perhaps inspired by seismic activity in this unstable region. The irony is delicious. A civilization built on controlling nature's bounty, undone by nature's fury. Modern searches have turned up fortified settlements like Cancho Rono, their altars stacked with sacrificed horses and Phoenician glass. Yet without a Rosetta Stone-style inscription declaring, "This is Tartessos," the debate rages on. What makes Tartessos unique among vanished kingdoms isn't its ambiguity, it's how that ambiguity served a purpose. For Phoenicians, it was a decoy, a glittering mirage to protect real mineral sources. For Greeks, it symbolized the edge of the known world, a place where geography blurred into fable. Even today, Tartessos plays a sly game with historians, offering just enough evidence to feel real while withholding the final proof. Maybe that's its true legacy, not a city of gold, but a mirror held up to our own hunger for discovery, reminding us that sometimes the most enduring kingdoms are the ones we can't quite pin down. The desert sun beat down on Francisco Vázquez de Coronado's exhausted expedition in 1540, baking their armor until it seared flesh. They'd marched for months, following whispers from Zuni and Hopi guides about Cibola, 7 cities where gold-lined streets shimmered like mirages. When they finally reached the adobe pueblos of present-day New Mexico, the truth struck like a physical blow. No golden towers, no jeweled temples, just multi-story villages of sun-dried clay. Coronado's rage was legendary. He arrested his guides, convinced they'd deceived him, but the real deception was far more tragic, an entire continent's history rewritten by greed's distorting lens. The origins of the 7 cities myth reveal how easily truth becomes legend. Decades earlier, a shipwrecked Spaniard named Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca wandered the southwest, surviving through indigenous hospitality. His account, filtered through colonial wishful thinking, transformed Zuni trade in turquoise and copper into rumors of Aztec-level riches, but the deeper roots lie in Moorish Iberia. Medieval Portuguese legends told of 7 bishops fleeing Muslim conquest, founding cities of untold wealth across the Atlantic. When Spanish explorers heard indigenous tales of prosperous communities like Jahuaca, they didn't hear descriptions of agrarian life. They heard confirmation of their own inherited fantasies. The myth wasn't just misinterpretation, it was cultural projection at continental scale. Archaeology paints a different picture. The ancestral Pueblones did build wonders cliff dwellings at Mesa Verde, road networks spanning hundreds of miles, but their wealth was communal, not metallic. Corn, not gold, anchored their economy. The Spaniards, blinded by old-world notions of value, couldn't recognize a different kind of sophistication. When Gaspar Castaño de Sosa illegally invaded New Mexico in 1590, his men ransacked Pico's Pueblo's ceremonial kivas, finding sacred masks inlaid with mother-of-pearl. To them, it was proof of hidden treasure. To the Pico's people, it was sacrilege. The true gold of these cities lay in their social fabric, complex clan systems, astronomical knowledge, and drought-resistant agriculture, all erased in the scramble for bullion. The cruelest twist, some indigenous communities may have weaponized the myth. Oral histories suggest the Zuni deliberately directed Coronado away from their sacred sites toward less significant pueblos. Other tribes spun tales of gold just beyond the next mountain, buying time to organize resistance or flee. The Spanish, trapped in their own delusion, kept chasing shadows while real civilization slipped through their fingers. This wasn't just miscommunication, it was strategic myth-making by people who understood their invaders' psychology better than the invaders understood the land. Today, the 7 cities live on as a cautionary tale about the cost of conflating legend with entitlement. Satellite imagery reveals extensive Puebloan irrigation systems under modern ranches, proof of the ingenuity Europeans overlooked. Meanwhile, descendants of those same pueblos still inhabit places like Taos and Acoma, their cultures resilient despite centuries of erasure. The real vanished cities weren't made of gold. They were ways of life shattered by conquest, their fragments surviving in pottery designs, corn rituals, and stories told in languages that refused to die. Coronado sought treasure and found only dust, but the dust itself was the treasure if only he'd known how to see it. North of the known world, beyond the howling winds that froze Black Sea sailors in their tracks, the ancient Greeks placed a kingdom untouched by sorrow or sickness. Hyperborea wasn't just a myth, it was a rebellion against geography itself. While their Mediterranean neighbors shuddered at tales of frozen wastelands, Greek poets like Pindar spun visions of a paradise where the sun never set, where fields bore fruit without labor, and where people lived 1,000 years in bliss. The very name Hyperborea means beyond the north wind, a land so remote that Boreas, the god of winter's bite, couldn't reach it. But here's the delicious irony. this utopia thrived in the one place Greeks feared most, the icy unknown. What makes Hyperborea fascinating isn't its impossibility, but how that impossibility became its greatest strength. Most myths explain the familiar: floods, wars, love. Hyperborea did the opposite. It glorified the unexplored. When Herodotus wrote about it in the 5th century BCE, he admitted no one had ever seen it, yet he recorded detailed accounts of Hyperborean pilgrims bringing sacred offerings to Delos wrapped in wheat straw. The story defied logic. How could a land of eternal summer exist in the Arctic? But that was the point. Hyperborea wasn't a place, it was a thought experiment. What if the harshest frontier hid the gentlest paradise? The myth's endurance reveals how climate shapes imagination. Greek colonies along the Black Sea coast faced brutal winters, their ships locked in ice for months. To sailors who watched comrades perish in blizzards, Hyperborea offered psychological refuge, proof that beyond the suffering lay a realm where cold wasn't cruel but kind. Later, when Romans encountered Germanic tribes with their blonde hair and blue eyes, they whispered these must be Hyperborean descendants, their fairness proof of dwelling closer to the celestial realms. Even medieval maps, though increasingly accurate, kept Hyperborea floating at their edges, a stubborn reminder that some dreams resist cartography. Science should have killed Hyperborea. As explorers mapped the Arctic, finding tundra instead of orchards, the myth adapted. 19th century mystics like Madame Blavatsky relocated it to the Hollow Earth, while Nazi occultists sent expeditions to Greenland seeking Hyperborean, Aryan roots. Yet stripped of these grotesque distortions, the core idea endures. Modern astronomers studying exoplanets in habitable zones still call them Hyperborean worlds, a nod to humanity's oldest hope, that beyond the next frontier, beyond all suffering, waits a land where we might finally be free. Perhaps that's the true lesson of this Arctic mirage. Hyperborea isn't about geography at all. It's about the stories we tell ourselves to make the unknown bearable. When the Greeks looked north, they didn't see empty ice. They saw a canvas for their deepest longing, proof that paradise isn't behind us in some golden age, but ahead, always just beyond the wind. The waves of Cardigan Bay keep a secret beneath their rolling swells, a kingdom lost not to war or time, but to the sea's relentless hunger. Cantre, Gualod, the Lowland Hundred, was said to be a fertile realm protected by a massive dike, its gates manned by a drunken watchman named Segney. One stormy night, as legend goes, he neglected his duty, letting the tides breach the defenses. The waters rushed in, swallowing 16 villages and their lush fields in a single catastrophic flood. But what makes this Welsh tale so haunting isn't just its drama, it's the eerie overlap with historical truth. Geologists have traced submerged forests and human-made structures beneath Cardigan Bay, remnants of a landscape that once stretched miles beyond today's coastline. Radiocarbon dating places these ruins between 4,000 and 5,000 years old, aligning with a period of rapid sea level rise after the last ice age. The folk memory of Cantre Gualod isn't pure fantasy, it's a poetic echo of real environmental trauma, a collective retelling of coastal communities watching their world drown. Like Lionesse's bells, the legend preserves the shock of displacement in metaphor, turning geological upheaval into human folly. The story's evolution reveals how myths adapt to serve their tellers. Early medieval versions blame Segney's negligence, framing the flood as moral punishment. Later Christian retellings cast the watchman as a priest, his drunkenness symbolizing spiritual decay. But the core remains unchanged, a warning about humanity's fragile pact with nature. Fishermen still claim to hear the drowned kingdom's church bells on quiet evenings, their chimes mingling with the cries of gulls. These auditory ghosts aren't just folklore, they're sensory mnemonics anchoring the past to the present through sound. Archaeology adds layers to the mystery. In 1850, a storm exposed petrified tree stumps near Allure, their roots twisted as if frozen in mid-scream. 19th century, dredgers hauled up tools and hearthstones from the bay's floor. Even the name Cantre Gualod hints at truth. Lowland suggests a place vulnerable to rising waters, a detail too precise to be accidental. The legend's endurance lies in this duality. It's both a fantastical tale and an oral history manual, teaching each generation to respect the sea's power. Modern climate change lends the myth grim relevance. As Wales's coasts erode, Cantre Gualod shifts from ancient tragedy to contemporary caution. Scientists project that Cardigan Bay could reclaim another 300 feet of land by 2100, mirroring the slow-motion disaster of the original flood. The Drowned Kingdom's legacy isn't just a sunken past, it's a rising future, whispering that all shores are temporary and every paradise we build sits on borrowed time. There's something deliciously frustrating about Phantom Islands, those stubborn specks on old maps that refuse to exist no matter how hard explorers search. Unlike sunken kingdoms swallowed by the sea, these places had a different kind of magic. They were never real to begin with, yet they clung to charts for centuries, luring sailors into empty ocean. Take High Brassel, the most persistent of them all. West of Ireland, this circular island appeared on maps as early as 1325, sometimes drawn with a river bisecting it like a cosmic bullseye. Expeditions set sail repeatedly, convinced it lay just beyond the horizon's curve, but when ships reached its coordinates, they found only churning waves and disappointed crews. The island didn't vanish, it evaporated, a trick of light, hope, and perhaps a little cartographic pride. The mechanics of these illusions reveal how easily reality bends to expectation. Some phantom islands began as mirages, Fata Morgana distortions stretching distant coastlines into floating castles. Others were mischarted icebergs, their transient bulk mistaken for solid land. Then there were the outright fabrications, like the infamous Isle of Demons off Newfoundland, where 16th century mapmakers placed wailing spirits to deter competitors. But High Brassel's case is more poetic. Irish folklore described it as a mist-shrouded paradise visible only once every 7 years, a Celtic Avalon where time flowed differently. When Portuguese and English sailors failed to find it, they didn't blame the myth, they blamed their own timing. The island wasn't absent, it was simply hiding, as enchanted realms ought to do. What's fascinating isn't the errors themselves, but why they persisted long after logic demanded their erasure. Sailors' logs from the Age of Discovery are littered with accounts of lands that moved or sank upon approach. The Aurora Islands, first sighted in 1762 near the Falklands, were hunted for 100 years before hydrographers admitted they were likely optical illusions caused by atmospheric inversions. Yet even after official maps purged them, fishermen and whalers kept reporting glimpses, their minds stitching clouds into coastlines. These weren't lies, they were collisions between human perception and the featureless expanse of the sea, where boredom and desperation conspired to conjure solid ground from endless blue. The legacy of Phantom Islands isn't just about bad geography, it's about the stories we need to tell ourselves to endure the unknown. When the Dutch labeled an uncharted Pacific speck, Sandy Island, on 18th century maps, it stayed there until 2012, when an Australian survey ship sailed through its coordinates and found nothing but ocean a mile deep. Scientists now attribute its existence to a quirk. Early navigators sometimes marked hazards like reefs with ED for existence doubtful, and over time the E faded, leaving behind a phantom D that looked like a cartographer's confirmation. But here's the twist: local legends in New Caledonia speak of a vanishing sandbank in that very spot, a place that appears and disappears with the tides. Science dismisses it as a pumice, raft, or floating debris. Oral tradition insists it's real. Both might be right. In the end, these ghostly archipelagos teach us that a place can be factual without being true. They thrived not in spite of their impossibility, but because of it. Each blank space on a map was a dare to dream bigger, sail farther, and believe harder. Modern satellites have erased their hiding spots, yet High Brassel still surfaces in video games and fantasy novels, and Sandy Island enjoys a cult following among conspiracy theorists. The islands didn't survive because they were real. They survived because we wanted them to be, and desire has a way of outlasting even the most meticulous charts. After all, why should reality get the final word when myth sails on? The idea of a kingdom without men isn't just a fantasy, it's a cultural lightning rod, striking at the deepest anxieties and fascinations of every society that dared to imagine it. From the Greek Amazons, those fierce warriors who supposedly cut off one breast to draw their bows better, to China's legendary Nüwa kingdom, where women ruled with wisdom and mystical prowess, these female-only realms haunt history like rebellious ghosts. What's striking isn't just their existence in myth, but how fiercely they resist being pinned down. The more a culture insisted women belonged in domestic roles, the more these warrior queens and matriarchal utopias flourished in its stories, always just out of reach, always defying capture both literally and metaphorically. Take the Amazons, arguably the most famous of these vanished kingdoms. Greek writers like Herodotus place them at the edges of the known world, sometimes near the Black Sea, other times in Libya, but never quite where explorers could find them. Their descriptions were tantalizingly precise: bronze armor, crescent shields, a society that welcomed men only for breeding before sending them away. Yet every historical sighting crumbled under scrutiny. Scythian burial mounds revealed women buried with weapons, fueling speculation, but no all-female armies. The Amazons' power lay in their ambiguity. They were real enough to intimidate, mythical enough to evade debunking. Their vanishing act wasn't a flaw in the story, it was the point. A kingdom of women that could be located and conquered would lose its symbolic sting. Half a world away, the Nüwa kingdom in Chinese folklore played a different but equally provocative role. Described in the ancient classic of mountains and seas, Nüwa was a land where women governed through harmony with nature, drawing power from sacred pools that granted longevity. Unlike the warlike Amazons, Nüwa's women were scholars and healers, their authority rooted in spiritual wisdom rather than brute strength. Yet both myths shared a core subversion. They presented societies where male presence was optional, even disposable. For Confucian China, with its rigid patriarchal hierarchy, Nüwa was a destabilizing daydream, one so unsettling that later dynasties recast it as a cautionary tale, twisting its legacy into warnings of unnatural rule. Even the Bible harbors whispers of these realms. The Ethiopian legend of the Queen of Sheba, who traveled to test Solomon's wisdom, evolved in medieval Europe into tales of a hidden matriarchy where men were kept as servants. In West Africa, the Dahomey Amazons, real-life female warriors of the Kingdom of Dahomey, inspired awe and fear, their existence blurring the line between myth and reality so deftly that European colonizers exaggerated their numbers into the thousands, as if unable to process the truth of women soldiers. Why do these kingdoms cling to our imagination? Because they're more than stories, they're pressure valves for cultural tensions. The Amazon myth thrived in Greece precisely because Athenian women were confined to the home. Nüwa persisted in China as a quiet counterpoint to imperial edicts. Their elusiveness is their armor. A conquerable Amazon stronghold would confirm male dominance, but a kingdom that forever recedes into the horizon, that's a challenge that never fades. These realms didn't vanish, they retreated into the collective unconscious, always one step ahead, always daring us to question why their existence feels so impossible. And that's how myths outlast empires, not by standing firm, but by dissolving like mist when you reach for them, leaving only the echo of a question, what if? Long before Atlantis captured imaginations, a different lost continent haunted the Pacific, Mu, a sunken paradise said to have birthed all human civilization. The story begins not in ancient temples, but in the fevered mind of a 19th-century charlatan. Augustus Le Plongeon, a self-styled archaeologist working in the Yucatan, became obsessed with Mayan hieroglyphs he couldn't decipher. Convinced he'd uncovered references to a motherland older than Egypt, he christened it Mu, a name plucked from mistranslation and wishful thinking. His theory was pure fantasy, but like all great myths, it found fertile soil in the anxieties of its time. The late 1800s were an era of seismic shifts, Darwin's evolution rattling religious certainty, empires crumbling, and science rewriting humanity's origins. Mu offered a comforting counter-narrative, proof that civilization wasn't a slow crawl upward, but a fallen glory waiting to be reclaimed. Le Plongeon's Mu was just the beginning. The myth metastasized when James Churchward, a British occultist, claimed in the 1920s to have discovered ancient tablets in India describing Mu's catastrophic sinking. His books wove a tapestry of advanced technology, giant crystals, and a white-robed priesthood, a Pacific Atlantis dripping with mystical allure. Never mind that no such tablets were ever verified, or that geologists dismissed the idea of a sunken Pacific continent as impossible. Mu's power lay in its timing. The interwar period, with its disillusionment and hunger for alternatives to rigid modernity, embraced Churchward's vision. Theosophists adopted Mu as a sister civilization to their own invented root race, the Lemurians. Suddenly, this fabricated kingdom had temples, flying ships, and a tragic end worthy of opera, all without a shred of evidence. What's fascinating isn't just Mu's invention, but its stubborn refusal to die. Unlike Atlantis, which Plato at least framed as allegory, Mu was born as hoax yet outlived its creators. New Age communities in the 1960s grafted it onto UFO lore, claiming Mu's survivors fled to underground cities or became interstellar guides. Japanese researchers in the 1980s discovered underwater ruins off Yonaguni, promptly declaring them Mu's remnants despite geologists identifying the formations as natural sandstone. Even today, TikTok algorithms push videos of Mu energy grids and lost frequencies, proving how effortlessly pseudoscience mutates for new mediums. The secret to Mu's longevity, it's a blank check for nostalgia. Atlantis carries baggage, Plato's moralizing, Nazi distortions, Hollywood cliches. Mu is purer, unburdened by classical roots, free to be whatever its believers need. A pre-colonial utopia, a cautionary eco-fable, even an anti-Western manifesto. Modern Mu isn't about the past at all. It's a Rorschach test for our present fears of climate collapse, of AI run amok, of civilizations repeating their mistakes. The real lost continent isn't beneath the Pacific. It's the gap between what we know and what we wish were true, a space where drowned kingdoms never stop rising to the surface. High in the thin air of the Himalayas, where snow meets sky, there's a kingdom that doesn't hide in ruins or beneath waves. It lives in the pages of a novel, yet feels as real as the mountain winds. James Hilton's 1933 novel Lost Horizon introduced the world to Shangri-La, a hidden valley where time slows, wisdom accumulates, and no one grows old. But here's the twist. Long after the book faded from bestseller lists, people kept searching for this fictional paradise. Expeditions scoured Tibet, Nepal, and Sichuan, convinced Hilton's creation was a veiled account of a real place. How does a writer's daydream become a legend so potent it rewrites geography? The answer lies in the alchemy of escapism, the way a story, when told at just the right moment, can fill a hunger too deep for facts to satisfy. Hilton didn't invent Shangri-La from nothing. He tapped into a vein of myths older than the Himalayas themselves. Tibetan Buddhists spoke of Shambhala, a hidden realm of enlightened beings. Chinese poets wrote of Peach Blossom Spring, a utopia discovered by accident and never found again. Even colonial explorers returned with tales of remote valleys where apricots grew sweeter and elders lived past 100. Hilton's genius was distilling these fragments into something sleek and modern, a sanctuary for a world still reeling from World War I's horrors and bracing for the next catastrophe. Shangri-La wasn't just a place, it was a balm for the 20th century's existential dread, offering a vision of permanence in an era of upheaval. The myth's grip tightened because it left room for believers. Hilton's descriptions were just specific enough to tantalize glacial peaks, lamaseries clinging to cliffs, a climate inexplicably mild for its altitude, but vague enough to fit any number of Himalayan valleys. When National Geographic explorers claimed to find echoes of Shangri-La in China's Yunnan province, the local town of Zhongdian eagerly rebranded itself as the real Shangri-La, complete with airport renamings and themed hotels. The Chinese government even endorsed the idea, recognizing the tourism goldmine in a fictional name. Here, fiction didn't just imitate reality, it rewrote it, proving that a story could carve its own canyons into the map. What makes Shangri-La extraordinary isn't its beauty, but its timing. The 1930s were a crucible of fear, economic collapse, rising fascism, the looming specter of another war. In that climate, a paradise untouched by time wasn't just a fantasy, it was a lifeline. The myth endured because it was flexible. For some, it symbolized spiritual enlightenment, for others, a retreat from modernity's chaos. Even the U.S. military borrowed the name for Roosevelt's wartime retreat, a tongue-in-cheek nod to the allure of hidden sanctuaries. Shangri-La's power lies in its duality, a fiction that feels truer than truth because it answers a need no fact can satisfy. The lesson here isn't about gullibility, but about the stories we cling to when the world feels fractured. Atlantis warns us of hubris, El Dorado mocks our greed. But Shangri-La, it's different. It doesn't chastise or vanish, it lingers, always just out of reach, promising that somewhere beyond the next pass, there's a valley where the air is clearer, the people kinder, and the weight of time lifts like morning mist. That's why we'll keep searching, even knowing it was never real, because some kingdoms don't need to exist in stone to survive. They just need to live in the part of us that still believes in miracles. History is never truly buried, it just waits for the right moment to be resurrected. Across the Balkans, where empires have risen and fallen like tides, vanished kingdoms don't just linger in folklore, they're exhumed, polished, and pressed into service as national symbols. Take Serbia's medieval kingdom of Prilep, a realm that crumbled under Ottoman conquest in the 14th century. For centuries, it existed as little more than a footnote in Byzantine chronicles. But when modern Serbia sought to carve its identity from the wreckage of Yugoslavia, Prilep's ghost was summoned back to life. Suddenly, its ruins weren't just relics, they were proof of an unbroken lineage, a golden age to anchor a nation's pride. The same castles that once marked defeat were recast as bulwarks of resilience, their stones rearranged in the collective imagination to fit a new narrative of endurance. This alchemy isn't unique to Serbia. Bulgaria's obsession with ancient Thrace reveals the same blueprint. The Thracians, a patchwork of tribes conquered by Rome, left behind dazzling gold masks and cryptic tombs, but no written records. That absence became a canvas. Modern Bulgaria, eager to distance itself from its Soviet past, embraced Thrace as a pre-Slavic ancestor, its myths woven into school textbooks and political speeches. The Orpheus cult, once a minor mystery religion, was rebranded as evidence of Europe's first spiritual awakening. Never mind that the historical Thracians had no concept of Bulgaria as a nation. In the hands of politicians and poets, their legacy became a weapon of soft power, a way to claim deeper roots than Greece or Turkey could boast. The process is always the same. A kingdom falls, its memory fades, then centuries later, it's dusted off and retrofitted with modern meaning. Croatia's medieval kingdom of Dalmatia, Lithuania's Grand Duchy, even Macedonia's contested Alexander the Great heritage, all serve as ideological fuel. These aren't innocent acts of remembrance. They're strategic resurrections where myth becomes mortar binding the fractures of modern identity. Archaeologists grown as digs turn into political theater, with each artifact paraded as proof of primordial sovereignty. The irony is delicious. The very kingdoms that failed to survive conquest now march again, not in armor, but in school curricula and border disputes. What makes this phenomenon so potent is its emotional alchemy. A child in Belgrade isn't taught about Prilep as a failed state. They're told it's a stolen inheritance, a paradise lost but not forgotten. A festivalgoer in Plovdiv doesn't see Thracian reenactments as theater. They're participating in a sacred continuity. These vanished kingdoms thrive not despite their obscurity, but because of it. Gaps in the record become spaces for projection, where every ruin can be a palace and every warlord a philosopher king. The past isn't just remembered, it's remade, its ambiguities sanded away until it fits snugly into the present's agenda. Yet for all its manipulation, this myth-making serves a primal need. In a region where borders have shifted like desert sands, these resurrected kingdoms offer something solid to stand on. They're not lies exactly, more like antidotes to historical vertigo. When the ground beneath your feet has been redrawn by wars and treaties, sometimes the only compass is a kingdom that no map can hold. The truth of Prilep or Thrace matters less than the purpose they serve, to convince a people that their story didn't begin with occupation or communism, but with crowns and glory. And so the dead kingdoms rise again, not in stone, but in statute books and street names, less history than oxygen for national survival. The jungle canopy hides its secrets well, but not from the piercing gaze of technology. In the dense rainforests of Guatemala, where vines strangle ancient stones and roots pry apart forgotten plazas, laser pulses fired from aircraft reveal what human eyes could never see. This is LiDAR light detection and ranging peeling back centuries of overgrowth like a surgeon's scalpel, exposing the bones of Mayan cities that thrived when Europe languished in the Dark Ages. Gone are the days when explorers hacked through underbrush hoping to stumble upon ruins. Now, digital maps bloom with causeways, reservoirs, and pyramids, each scan rewriting history with cold, unblinking precision. The mythical White City of Honduras, long dismissed as conquistador fantasy, materialized as a sprawling metropolis under LiDAR's gaze. The scale is staggering, tens of thousands of structures, entire road networks, agricultural terraces, proof that these weren't isolated temples but interconnected kingdoms pulsing with life. But technology's magic doesn't stop at mapping stones. DNA analysis breathes life into the dust, tracing the rise and fall of civilizations through strands of genetic code. Take the Minoans of Crete, their vibrant frescoes hinting at a sophisticated culture erased by volcanic fury. By sequencing ancient DNA, scientists uncovered a startling truth. These weren't invaders from distant lands, but descendants of local Neolithic farmers who'd thrived for millennia. Their genes carried whispers of trade routes, revealing connections to Anatolia and the Levant that history books never recorded. Similarly, in Cambodia, genetic studies of modern Khmer people revealed traces of the Angkor Empire's collapse not in blood-soaked battlefields, but in gradual migrations driven by climate change and failing infrastructure. Myth spoke of divine abandonment, science whispers of monsoons and silted canals. The real revolution lies in how these tools blur the line between legend and ledger. For generations, the Maya city of Tikal was known only from vague references in Spanish chronicles. Lyonesse revealed it as the heart of a vast network, connected to lost cities like El Zots by elevated causeways. Suddenly, folktales about roads through the trees gained archaeological weight. Meanwhile, isotopic analysis of teeth from Viking burials confirmed Norse sagas describing voyages to North America, not as fanciful yarns, but as records of real expeditions centuries before Columbus. The bones themselves became archives, their chemical signatures mapping migration patterns more accurately than any parchment. Yet for all its power, technology doesn't erase mystery, it deepens it. When Lyonesse uncovered a massive ceremonial platform beneath the Maya site of Aguada Phoenix, dated to 1000 BCE, it upended assumptions about the region's timeline. This structure predated known Maya cities by centuries, suggesting a forgotten precursor civilization. Likewise, DNA from Britain's post-Roman graves revealed a genetic puzzle. Instead of the expected Anglo-Saxon takeover, the population showed gradual mixing, hinting at alliances and cultural exchange rather than conquest. The past, it seems, refuses to fit neat narratives, even when illuminated by lasers and genomes. What emerges is a new kind of resurrection, not of kings and conquests, but of everyday lives. Pollen analysis shows how the Maya adapted to drought by cultivating water-intensive crops like cacao right up to their collapse. Soil samples from Viking Greenland contain traces of sheep dung and barley, proving Norse settlers clung to European farming methods even as the Little Ice Age froze their fields. These aren't just data points, they're intimate portraits of resilience and hubris coded in molecules and microwaves. The irony is delicious. The same tools that demystify the past also amplify its wonder. Lyonesse strips away jungle to reveal cities, only to expose how little we still understand their demise. DNA traces lineages, yet uncovers migrations so vast they defy old borders. The lost kingdoms rising from myth today aren't the gilded utopias of legend, they're complex, flawed societies whose echoes resonate in our own era of climate crises and globalization. Technology hasn't solved history's puzzles, it's given us better pieces to play with, each discovery a reminder that every golden age was somebody's messy present. And perhaps that's the greatest gift of this scientific renaissance, not just seeing the past clearly, but recognizing ourselves in its reflection. We don't just tell stories about lost kingdoms, we need them. Like oxygen for the imagination, these vanished realms fill a void no map can satisfy. They thrive in the space between what we know and what we ache to believe, serving as mirrors for our deepest fears and wildest hopes. Consider how often these myths follow the same arc: a golden age, a fatal flaw, a cataclysm that leaves only whispers. This isn't coincidence, it's a cultural blueprint, a way to process the uncomfortable truth that every civilization, no matter how mighty, is just one disaster away from becoming dust and legend. Mystery is the first gift these stories offer. In a world where satellites map every inch of the planet, the idea that a Shangri-La or Atlantis might still lurk undiscovered is intoxicating. It's not about geography, but possibility, the thrill that the universe still holds secrets too vast for Google Earth to contain. When explorers claim to find traces of El Dorado in the Amazon's tangled depths, or when Lydia revealed Maya megacities under jungle canopies, the public's fascination wasn't just about archaeology. It was the reminder that wonder still exists, that the age of discovery isn't over. These myths preserve the childlike itch to peel back the world's layers and gasp at what's hidden beneath. Yet these tales are also cautionary, dressed in the finery of fantasy. Atlantis isn't remembered for its engineering marvels, but for its hubris, a warning etched in seawater. The flood myths of Cantre, Gualod, and Lyonesse don't just describe rising tides, they scream that nature always wins. Even the dreamy Utopia of Shambhala carries a barbed message. Enlightenment is possible, but only after the world teeters on collapse. These stories endure because they're more than entertainment, they're moral compasses disguised as bedtime stories, teaching us to tread lightly on the earth and each other. But perhaps their most vital function is as vessels of hope. When Rome fell, survivors spun tales of a someday returning emperor sleeping under a mountain. The Welsh clung to the prophecy of King Arthur's return from Avalon during their oppression under English rule. These weren't naive fantasies, they were lifelines, ways to endure present suffering by anchoring it to a grander narrative. A lost kingdom isn't really lost if its promise still shines. In this light, myths like El Dorado or Prester John's realm become psychological survival tools, proof that somewhere, even if only in stories, justice prevails, beauty endures, and the good don't always die. Science might demystify the ruins, but it can't extinguish the fire these legends stoke. When archaeologists proved Troy was real, the Iliad didn't shrink, it grew richer, its heroes stepping from poetry into history without shedding their mythic glow. The same will happen when, not if, we pinpoint the real inspirations for Shangri-La or the Amazon's golden cities, because these stories were never about facts. They're about the parts of us that refuse to be rational, the longing for second chances, the need to believe that no fall is final, and the faith that even the greatest kingdoms leave echoes. And as long as humanity dreams, builds, and inevitably stumbles, we'll keep conjuring these vanished realms, not to explain the past, but to navigate the future. From Atlantis to Shangri-La, these vanished kingdoms never truly disappear. They simply change form, trading walls and thrones for something far more enduring, our collective imagination. The real magic isn't in their golden spires or sunken streets, but in how they outlive their own collapse, transforming from places into ideas too powerful to fade. Consider how every culture, from the Inuit to the Inca, has its own version of a lost paradise or drowned city. This isn't coincidence, it's human nature. When physical kingdoms crumble, they don't vanish, they become stories, and stories are the ultimate survivors. Take the way these legends adapt across centuries. The Aztecs spoke of Aztlan, their mythical homeland, while medieval Europeans dreamed of Prester John's realm. Different continents, different eras, yet the same yearning for a place just beyond reach. These myths endure because they're not about geography, they're about us. The fear of catastrophe, the ache for utopia, the stubborn hope that greatness isn't lost, only hidden. When archaeologists uncover a real Troy or a submerged Dwarka, they don't erase the legend, they give it new roots, proving that truth and myth aren't opposites, but partners in a dance across time. But here's the beautiful paradox: the more science reveals, the richer these stories become. Lidea scans and DNA analysis don't drain the magic from Shangri-La or El Dorado, they add layers. Knowing that the Amazon's green hell once held sprawling cities doesn't diminish its mystery, it deepens it, forcing us to confront how much we still don't understand. The real loss isn't when a kingdom is found, but when we stop wondering what else might be waiting in the shadows. So do we sacrifice wonder when we uncover facts? Not if we're listening closely. The bells of Lyonesse still chime in fishermen's tales, even as sonar maps its drowned forests. Avalon lingers in Glastonbury's mists, whether Arthur slept there or not. These legends remind us that history isn't just written in ink and stone, but in the stories we choose to keep alive, and that's where you come in. Share your favorite lost kingdom in the comments. Is it the jungle-shrouded temples of Ankh, or the Arctic mirage of Hyperborea? By swapping these tales, we become modern bards, ensuring that the next chapter isn't just discovered, but dreamed. Hit subscribe to keep the journey going, because the past isn't finished with us yet. Somewhere between fact and fable, the next great mystery is